Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really massive geopolitical and economic mystery that's literally unfolding right now on the global stage. It's this fascinating story of two very different realities colliding. And honestly, it perfectly illustrates how global markets and high-stakes geopolitics are just deeply, intrinsically linked. We're going to figure out exactly what the markets are seeing that the raw economic data kind of seems to be missing. Let's jump in. To really understand this mystery, we gotta start with a pretty bleak figure, 8.3%. According to recent government data, India's wholesale inflation just unexpectedly spiked to 8.3% in April. Now, that's the highest and fastest pace we've seen in 3.5 years. It's a dramatic escalation from the previous month, mostly driven by systemic energy shocks and surging costs triggered by the ongoing US-Iran conflict in West Asia. But, and here's where it gets wild, almost simultaneously, on the exact same day we were all digesting that rough 8.3% inflation figure, the markets did something crazy. We saw a massive single-day surge of 790 points in the Sensex. The Nifty 50 rallied right alongside it. There was broad-based buying everywhere: pharma, metal, oil-linked stocks, infrastructure. The stock market was basically throwing a massive celebration. So that brings us to the core mystery we're unpacking today. You've got soaring inflation and disrupted global trade on one hand, right? But then, booming stock markets on the other. How on earth can both of these things be true at the exact same time? Like, how can the financial economy be popping champagne with a massive rally, while the physical economy is clearly under extreme, undeniable stress? Well, the answer lies in what the market is actually pricing into the future. Let's quickly break down the Wholesale Price Index, or WPI, just to ground ourselves in what's happening in the physical economy. So the headline number is 8.3%, sure, but when you look under the hood, the internal mechanics are just staggering. Fuel and power surged almost 25%, and the real shocker, a 67.18% spike in crude petroleum. That is a direct consequence of the conflict in West Asia, disrupting global supply routes. Basically, this data tells us that producer-side costs are just skyrocketing, creating massive margin pressures for businesses. This is the heavy macroeconomic stress the real economy is dealing with right now. Section 1. Inside the Beijing Summit, the missing puzzle piece. Okay, so what actually caused this massive market rally? Well, it boils down to a high-stakes diplomatic meeting in Beijing between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping. This summit is the missing puzzle piece that explains the huge disconnect between the inflation data and the soaring stock prices. You see, the market isn't looking at yesterday's inflation, it's looking at the geopolitical rejuvenation promised by this meeting. Listen to the incredibly cooperative tone coming from the absolute top. We should be partners and not rivals. That unexpected diplomatic truce from the Chinese president signaled a massive wave of relief to anxious global markets. After periods of intense trade wars and tariff hikes crossing 100%, a sentiment like that suggests a real pivot toward economic cooperation. The markets rallied because this handshake in Beijing feels like a genuine potential de-escalation of global tensions. The absolute crucial point, though, is what they actually agreed on during the summit, which analysts are now calling the Hormuz Accord. This was a strategic push to secure the free flow of global energy. And the ultimate prize here? Reopening the Strait of Hormuz. It's actually wild when you think about it. At its narrowest point, this strait is literally only 21 miles wide, yet it carries roughly a fifth of the world's total oil supplies. Because of the conflict, tankers have just been stranded, completely choking global supply. So an agreement between the US and China that this strait absolutely must remain open? Yeah, that is a massive, fundamental shift for global energy stability. Let's trace the domino effect of how this actually works in practice. Because of the ongoing conflict, Brent crude spiked to over $105 a barrel. So the US is essentially asking China to intervene. And you might be wondering, why China? Well, because Beijing holds immense leverage as Tehran's absolute largest oil buyer. The whole market rally we saw earlier is based entirely on the hope that China is going to use this leverage to bring Iran to the table, reopen the strait, and completely drop the global war premium on oil. If that premium drops, energy costs for a manufacturer all the way in India will eventually drop too. It's all connected. Moving on to Section 2. Tech, trade, and tariffs. The supply chain truce. Now, this summit wasn't just about oil. It was also very much about the technology in our pockets. The meeting signaled a massive truce in the supply chain wars. To really grasp the corporate stakes of these talks, you just have to look at who is actually in the room. We saw some heavy-hitting American CEOs accompanying the US delegation to Beijing. I'm talking Tesla's Elon Musk, Apple's Tim Cook, and NVIDIA's Jensen Huang. Having them there really illustrates that, beyond all the geopolitical posturing, there are massive, multi-billion-dollar corporate stakes on the line. These companies absolutely need regulatory stability, and they need unfettered access to global markets and materials if they're going to thrive. And honestly, this dynamic brilliantly illustrates exactly why both sides are highly motivated to just stop weaponizing supply chains. It's a relationship of really deep mutual dependence. Think about it. The US tech and defense industries desperately need access to Chinese rare earth minerals. Meanwhile, China needs access to advanced US technology, specifically AI chips like the ones made by NVIDIA, to fuel their own technological growth. Neither superpower can really afford a complete supply chain blockade without severely damaging their own economic interests. They kind of need each other. Section 3. What this means for you. So, we've covered the macro data, the oil choke points, the complex tech supply chains, but let's bring this all back down to earth. What does this actually mean for you, the everyday consumer, or the retail investor watching this explainer? Well, here is the core thesis mapped out for your wallet. If the Beijing summit actually succeeds in de-escalating the Middle East conflict, Brent crude prices are going to fall. That drop in global oil prices will eventually filter down through the system to reduce domestic manufacturing costs, and yes, even the price of fuel at your local pump. That's what could cool down that shocking 8.3% inflation figure we looked at right at the start. On top of that, stabilized supply chains mean the tech hardware you buy won't face these crazy artificial price hikes. This whole chain reaction perfectly explains why the stock market placed such a huge optimistic bet on future economic rejuvenation. But I gotta leave you with one final provocative thought. We've seen the raw data, right? The physical economy is hurting right now with soaring producer costs. And we've also seen the market soaring optimism, which is basically based on a diplomatic handshake. So you really have to ask yourself, is this geopolitical truce actually enough to overcome the deep macroeconomic stress currently in the system? Or is the stock market being dangerously over-optimistic about how quickly these massive global conflicts can actually be resolved? It is absolutely a fascinating paradox, and I really want to know where you stand on it. Do you trust the inflation data, or are you buying into the market's optimism? Let us know. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel, and definitely leave a comment below with your own thoughts and predictions on what happens next. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.